In 2023, American workers voluntarily handed their employers roughly 9.5 days of paid vacation back, just completely unused.
Which is staggering.
Right. I mean, that is literally hundreds of millions of hours of free labor across the economy. And it's driven almost entirely by, unspoken guilt and structural fear.
Yeah.
We are talking about people leaving their own compensated time on the table like time they earned, because taking a Tuesday off to go to the park feels like a career risk.
Exactly. It's a massive issue.
So today, for everyone listening, we are opening up a huge stack of global labor statistics, deep sociological data, and linguistic histories to really answer a question that affects every single one of you.
And it's a profound question.
It is. Why are the three words work-life balance the most universally spoken yet universally misunderstood phrase on Earth?
It truly is like a linguistic ghost. It just haunts every corporate seminar, every HR manual.
Every single dinner table conversation.
Right, exactly. And we are diving into this specific curation of research today because we want to decode how entirely different societies construct the very concept of labor.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, this isn't just about finding you a calendar hack to squeeze in a gym session.
Right.
We're looking at what different cultures believe work is actually for.
Yeah.
The structural mechanisms they use to enforce those beliefs, and how those frameworks completely define what we all consider a life well lived.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think people assume this phrase, work-life balance, is some, I don't know, ancient philosophical concept handed down from the Greeks or something.
Right, like Aristotle was worrying about his inbox.
Exactly. But looking at the historical data in our sources, it's practically an infant.
It is remarkably recent. I mean, the specific phrase work-life balance didn't really enter the mainstream lexicon until the late 1970s and early 1980s.
Really? That late?
Yeah, primarily in the United Kingdom and the United States. And the timing is not a coincidence at all. This perfectly mirrors the demographic earthquake of women entering the professional workforce in, massive, unprecedented numbers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, suddenly the dual-income household became a widespread structural reality rather than just, like, a wartime exception.
But wait, I mean, families obviously worked before the 1970s, right? So why did the language suddenly need to change? Was the sheer volume of labor just different?
Well, no, the volume wasn't necessarily different, but the location of the friction changed entirely.
What do you mean?
So prior to this shift, in the traditional mid-century nuclear family model, the balance was structurally divided between two separate human beings.
Oh, I see.
Right, one person went to the commercial sphere, the factory or the office, and the other managed the domestic sphere. The tension between labor and life was managed across an entire household.
That makes sense.
But when both adults entered the commercial sphere, that friction collapsed inward. It was suddenly internalized in a single individual's daily calendar. So the phrase had to be invented to describe this brand new, highly individualized societal anxiety.
Which really exposes the inherent flaw in the phrase's construction, doesn't it?
Totally.
Because if you call it work-life balance, you are automatically imposing a binary metaphor on the listener. You are like putting work on one side of a literal scale and life on the other side, and demanding that the individual act as the fulcrum.
And that implies an adversarial relationship right out of the gate. It suggests that work is somehow not part of your life,
Right.
which, biologically and temporally speaking, is absurd. You are alive while you're working.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yes. But the English language traps us in this zero-sum game where one must constantly be weighed against the other. And when you look at the international labor data, you see how different cultures interpret this exact same English phrase through wildly different legally enforced realities.
Yeah, take a French worker, for example. When you say work-life balance to someone in Paris, they aren't thinking about, a vague personal goal.
No, not at all.
They are thinking about hard, codified legislation.
Yes. For the French, this means legally protected vacation and the right to completely sever communication. It is a structural guarantee.
Wow.
But then, compare that to a Japanese salaryman. In our sociological sources regarding Tokyo's corporate culture, work-life balance isn't a luxury perk.
What is it then?
It's a desperate, state-sponsored health initiative. It is literally the government intervening to stop citizens from dying at their desks from heart failure.
That is so dark.
It is.
And then you have the Danish worker who probably looks at both the French and Japanese examples with utter confusion, right? Because the separation between work and life in Denmark is so structurally embedded.
Deeply embedded.
Yeah, from state-sponsored childcare to cultural norms, the balance is just maintained automatically. You don't have to, like, fight your boss for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you look at the American tech worker, the classic Silicon Valley model.
Oh.
Here, work-life balance means your office provides dry cleaning, a ping pong table, free cold brew on tap, and an unlimited vacation policy that is structurally designed to ensure you never actually leave the campus.
Yeah, it replaces the boundary of time with the provision of amenities.
Perfectly said.
I want to focus on how language limits us here, though, because English forces us onto this seesaw. If we want to truly rethink this, we have to borrow vocabulary from other cultures that have reframed the relationship completely.
I agree.
We have this concept in our sources from Japan that exists right alongside their culture of overwork. Let's talk about ikigai.
Ah, ikigai. It is a
Okay.
brilliant conceptual alternative. It translates roughly to your reason for being,
Okay.
and it originated in Okinawa, a region known for its incredible longevity, by the way. Ikigai is mapped as the intersection of four things: what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. Right. It is the nexus of passion, mission, vocation, and profession.
I find this fascinating because it completely destroys the seesaw metaphor. If work and life are on a seesaw, one goes up and the other must go down. But ikigai sounds more like a smoothie.
Smoothie.
Yeah, you take the spinach, the banana, the protein powder, and you just blend it together into one cohesive, nutritious thing. Once it's blended, you can't separate the work from the life.
That's a great way to look at it.
Hmm.
The ideal in ikigai isn't to balance two opposing forces. The ideal is profound integration. Your work is a vital, meaningful part of your life, not the enemy of it.
Right.
But, if that integration sounds too idealistic for some people, we can look at the German linguistic architecture.
Right.
They have a concept called Firebend.
Which is practically the polar opposite of a smoothie.
Completely. Firebend translates literally to celebration evening or closing time.
I love that.
Historically, it referred to the ringing of the church bells that signal the end of the agricultural or industrial workday. Culturally, it represents a sharp, definitive boundary. It is the specific epoch of the evening after work.
So no blending at all.
None. You do not balance work and Firebend. One ends definitively, and the other begins.
I always picture Fairbend as a giant steel vault door slamming shut at 5:00 p.m.
That's a very accurate mental image.
But I have to push back on this because we don't live in an agricultural society anymore where you just put down the plow. Doesn't that vault door create a deeply rigid, inflexible system?
Yeah.
Like if a massive server goes down at 5:05 p.m. or a client has an absolute emergency, does the German model just let the proverbial building burn down? How do they handle the modern economy's need for agility?
Yeah, that is a very common American critique of the European model. But the mechanism behind Firebend isn't about ignoring actual emergencies. It's about defining what constitutes a true emergency.
Oh, I see.
Right. In a culture without boundaries, every single email is treated as a fire. When you establish a cultural vault door, you force management to be incredibly precise about urgency.
That makes a lot of sense.
If the server literally crashes, yes, the on-call engineer fixes it. But if the boss just has a random thought about next quarter's marketing strategy at 8:00 p.m., the vault door dictates that it absolutely waits until 9:00 a.m. It protects cognitive energy.
Which brings us to the third linguistic alternative in our sociological data, the Danish concept of hygge.
Yes, hygge. It's often mistranslated simply as coziness, but that strips it of its real social weight.
What's the deeper meaning then?
Born out of long, dark, brutal Scandinavian winters, hygge was originally a psychological survival mechanism. It is the specific, unhurried, intentional social quality of non-work time.
Wow.
It's lighting a candle, drinking coffee with a friend, and actively choosing not to discuss ambition or stress. It is fiercely protected communal warmth.
So we have the smoothie of ikigai, the vault door of Firebend, and the intentional communal warmth of hygge. But if the English language has trapped so many of us in this anxiety-inducing seesaw, does the physical reality of our output actually justify the stress? What happens when we map these linguistic differences onto actual labor hours and global GDP?
Well, we hit a staggering data paradox. Let's look closely at the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, their global working hours data.
Okay, lay it on me.
In the United States, workers average approximately 1,800 hours of work per year.
1,800 hours. And how does that compare to the vault door culture of Germany?
German workers average roughly 1,350 hours a year.
Wait, that's a difference of 450 hours.
Yes,
If you assume a standard 8-hour workday, Americans are working essentially 56 more days a year than Germans. That is nearly 2 entire extra months of labor.
exactly. And French workers are right around 1,400 hours. Meanwhile, Japanese workers officially average about 1,680 hours, though sociologists and labor experts universally acknowledge that this drastically undercounts a massive cultural phenomenon of unpaid, off-the-books service overtime.
Right, so the real number is much higher.
Much higher. And then you have South Korea, which consistently tops the developed world charts at over 1,900 hours annually.
So the US and South Korea are practically living at the office. But basic industrial logic would dictate that if you are putting in 2 extra months of labor every year, your economy should be churning out vastly more value per person, right?
What's fascinating here is the data absolutely obliterates that industrial assumption.
Yeah.
The countries whose workers work the most hours are not the most productive countries.
Wait, really?
Really?
Yeah.
Germany, with the fewest working hours in the developed world, consistently ranks among the highest in economic output per hour worked.
Wow.
The United States, despite working significantly more, has lower productivity per hour than both Germany and France.
I need to make sure I'm understanding the mechanism here. Are German factories just running faster? Is it just better technology? What's going on?
It is a mix of structural labor laws and human neurobiology. Structurally, Germany has a system called Mitbestimmung, or co-determination, where workers hold seats on corporate boards.
Okay, so they have a say.
Exactly. This means labor optimization, like how to do the job efficiently without burning out the worker, is designed by the workers themselves. But neurobiologically, we're looking at something researchers call the cognitive cliff.
Oh, I know the concept of diminishing returns. Everyone has felt it. You study for a test for 5 hours, and that 5th hour isn't absorbing nearly as much information as the first.
Precisely. But what the organizational psychology data shows us is that it's not just diminishing. It becomes aggressively negative.
Negative.
Yeah. Human beings are not combustion engines. We cannot just pour more hours into the prefrontal cortex and expect a linear output. The cognitive cliff generally occurs right around the 48 to 50-hour mark per week.
So once you cross 50 hours, what is actually happening in the brain?
At a neurological level, your brain is depleting its glucose stores and experiencing severe decision fatigue. Cortisol, the stress hormone, builds up, which actively impairs the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex problem solving and creativity.
Wow.
Above 50 hours, your error rates spike dramatically. Your ability to read emotional cues from colleagues plummets, leading to workplace conflict. The extra hours you put in on a Friday evening are often generating work of such low quality that you will spend your Monday morning fixing the mistakes you made.
It makes me think of a wet sponge. On Monday morning, your brain is a sponge soaking in water. The first squeeze, you get a ton of water. Massive productivity.
Right.
By Thursday, you're getting a bit less. By the time you get to hour 60 on a Friday evening, there is literally no water left. Working a 60-hour week isn't getting more water out of the sponge. It's just aggressively, painfully squeezing a dry, crumbling sponge and trying to convince your boss that the dust falling out onto the desk is productivity.
That is a highly accurate and very sad visualization of cognitive depletion. But the tragedy of the American and South Korean models is that the cultures working the most hours falsely believe they're achieving more. The exhaustion becomes the proof of effort. If you aren't tired, you must not be dedicated.
But let me play the antagonist here for a second. I know entrepreneurs, I know startup founders who swear they thrive on 80-hour weeks. They say the 40-hour work week is for mediocre people, and to build something great, you need extreme volume. Are they just lying to themselves?
They aren't necessarily lying, but they are experiencing a very different psychological phenomena. A startup founder has high autonomy, high stakes, and total equity in the outcome.
Right, it's their company.
Exactly. That intrinsic motivation can temporarily mask the physical symptoms of burnout with massive hits of dopamine and adrenaline.
I see.
But a middle manager processing accounts payable for a massive conglomerate doesn't have that autonomy or equity. If you apply the 80-hour founder mentality to a standard corporate employee, you don't get a unicorn company. You just get a hospitalized workforce.
Which leads us directly to the ultimate mechanism for avoiding this cognitive cliff. If we know, definitively, that working fewer hours yields higher quality work, we have to talk about how the world handles vacation.
We do.
Because taking time off isn't just a fun little treat. It is a physiological necessity to clear the cortisol and replenish the prefrontal cortex.
And this is where the global data presents its starkest contrast. Let's look at the baseline legal minimums for paid vacation. In France, every single worker is legally entitled to 5 weeks of paid vacation per year, minimum.
5 weeks, just as a baseline right of citizenship.
Yeah. In Germany, the federal mandate is 4 weeks. In the United Kingdom, it is 5.6 weeks. Most of the European Union sits very comfortably between 4 and 6 weeks of guaranteed paid time off.
And then we cross the Atlantic to the United States.
The United States has absolutely zero federal legal minimum for paid vacation.
Zero.
The U.S. is the only advanced economy in the world that does not guarantee its workers a single paid day off. Whatever vacation an American gets is entirely at the discretion of the employer.
That's wild.
On average, an American worker negotiates or receives about 10 days, 2 weeks of paid vacation per year.
But here is the statistic from our sources that genuinely blew my mind. Even with only 10 meager days, they don't even take them.
They do not.
Yeah.
A major 2023 survey of the American workforce revealed that employees left an average of 9.5 days of paid vacation completely unused that year.
Think about the insanity of that. You are given 10 days. You leave 9.5 on the table. You essentially take a half day off for a dentist appointment and call it a year.
Pretty much.
If your company handed you a check for your salary, you wouldn't just leave 90% of it sitting on your boss's desk out of politeness. Why do people do this with their time? What is the mechanism driving this behavior?
The mechanism is deep structural fear. When sociologists poll American workers on why they abandon their vacation, the answers are profoundly anxious. First, it's the fear of the mountain of work.
Oh, because there's no backup?
Right. Because American companies run so lean, there's rarely cross-training. If you leave for a week, your work doesn't get covered. It just piles up, punishing you upon your return.
So taking a vacation actually creates more stress than just staying at the desk.
Precisely. Second, it is at-will employment. In much of Europe, firing an employee requires a massive legal process, severance, and union negotiation.
But in the U.S.?
In the U.S., you can generally be fired for almost any reason at any time. Furthermore, your family's health care is inextricably tied to your employment.
Right, so if you look expendable, you don't just lose your income, you lose your doctor.
Exactly. So the culture adapts by performing indispensability, taking your allotted vacation signals to management that you might not be 100% committed to the company. Workers worry about the silent judgments of their colleagues who are also drowning in work. The overwhelming psychological driver is guilt.
But if you took that exact same scenario, like leaving your vacation on the table, and dropped it into Scandinavia or France, how would that be perceived?
Oh, it would trigger immediate judgment, but in the opposite direction. Not taking your vacation in France is seen as bizarre, almost pathological.
Really?
Yeah. Your colleagues wouldn't think you were a dedicated corporate warrior. They would think you lacked a multidimensional life. Or worse, that you were inefficient and couldn't get your work done in the allotted time.
Because European societies aren't just relying on good vibes to protect their evenings and their holidays, they are passing aggressive legislation. Let's look at the right to disconnect.
This is a fascinating legal evolution. France pioneered this with a landmark 2017 law known as the right to disconnect.
What does it actually do?
It legally requires companies with more than 50 employees to negotiate agreements with unions that define exactly when employees are supposed to be offline. It essentially gave workers the legal right to ignore work-related emails and calls outside of their contracted hours without fear of retaliation.
And Portugal took this even further during the pandemic, right?
Portugal took it to the absolute limit in 2021. They passed a law making it actively illegal for employers to contact their employees outside of regular working hours.
Wow.
If a boss texts an employee at 8:00 p.m. on a Tuesday about a spreadsheet, the company can face massive financial penalties. Spain and Italy have introduced similar legislative protections.
Illegal. I just want you, the listener, to pause and imagine your boss texting you after dinner and knowing that they're the ones committing an infraction, not you for ignoring it. It completely rewires the power dynamic.
It formalizes the boundary. It asserts at a state level that the employer is purchasing your labor for a set amount of time, but they do not own your existence.
Yeah.
And this highlights the core philosophical difference in how these cultures view the job itself. We are looking at a fundamental clash between employment as a transaction versus employment as an identity.
I want to dig deep into that distinction, transaction versus identity.
In the French or German model, employment is largely viewed as a transaction. You are exchanging a specific, highly regulated number of your hours and skills for a specific amount of financial compensation.
Clean and simple.
Right. There is a clear boundary. Once the transaction for the day is complete, the relationship pauses. But in the American model, and increasingly the UK model, employment is treated as an identity commitment.
It's the first thing we ask each other at parties. What do you do? We don't mean what are your hobbies. We mean how do you generate capital?
Exactly. It's not what you do, it's who you are.
Hmm.
And when your job is your identity, availability equates to moral dedication.
Right.
In an identity-driven culture, answering a Slack message at 11:30 p.m. isn't viewed as a failure of time management or a violation of a boundary. It is a flex. It is a demonstration of your ultimate worth.
Oh, totally.
The executive who is constantly checking their phone during a child's soccer game is historically held up as the archetype of importance, rather than a cautionary tale of a life wildly out of balance.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because over the last decade, the American tech sector started realizing that this identity model was burning people out and causing massive turnover.
Yes.
But instead of changing the fundamental model, they just rebranded it. They invented unlimited vacation, which on paper sounds like a utopian dream. But based on the data, in practice, it's a trap.
It is a devastating psychological trap. When a company offers unlimited vacation within an identity-driven culture, they are removing the contractual baseline. They're saying, take as much time as you need as long as the work gets done.
But the work is never done.
Exactly.
It is exactly like walking into a massive all-you-can-eat buffet. But there are no plates provided, there are no signs telling you what a normal portion is, and your boss and all your coworkers are standing around silently staring at you, judging you to see how much you take.
Oh, that's good.
Right. If you reach for a single dinner roll, you feel their eyes on you. You end up starving because you are too terrified of looking greedy.
That is a phenomenal analogy. When there are no explicit rules, the unwritten cultural norms take total control. And if the unwritten rule is performative dedication, unlimited vacation actually results in employees taking less time off than if they were just given a rigid, mandated 2 weeks. The ambiguity breeds anxiety.
So if unlimited vacation is just a Band-Aid and ambiguity causes anxiety, how do we actually fix this? How do we stop performing for each other? To find out, we have to look north in our sources, to a region of the world that has structurally and culturally eradicated the need to perform dedication.
We are looking at the Nordic anomaly. The Scandinavian model, specifically Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland.
Right.
These countries consistently dominate global rankings for worker satisfaction, overall happiness, economic productivity, and what we loosely call work-life balance.
What are they doing differently? What is the mechanism behind the Nordic model?
It is an interlocking system of structural policy and deep cultural psychology.
Yeah.
Structurally, they enforce short working hours. Swedish workers average under 1,600 hours a year.
Wow.
They have even heavily tested 6-hour workdays in various public and private sectors. The results consistently showed that productivity remained entirely stable because workers weren't wasting time on performative tasks, while health outcomes and employee retention skyrocketed.
And we cannot talk about Scandinavia without discussing their parental leave, because it fundamentally alters the trajectory of a career.
It is globally unmatched. Sweden offers 480 days of paid parental leave. Norway offers 49 weeks. Denmark offers 52 weeks.
Incredible.
But what is critical here is the mechanism of how it's offered. They employ use it or lose it quotas, specifically for fathers, often called daddy quotas.
Right, because if you just offer blanket leave, historically, mothers take it, which then penalizes women in the corporate hierarchy because they are seen as the ones taking time off.
Exactly. By forcing fathers to take months of leave or risk the family losing the paid benefit entirely, the state structuralizes gender parity in the workplace.
That's brilliant.
Taking 6 months off to raise a child is no longer a mom thing that derails a career. It is a universal societal expectation for all parents. It represents a fundamental assumption that the early years of a human's life are vastly more important to the state than answering emails.
But policies only work if the culture actually supports them. You could drop a daddy quota into an American bank, and the fathers would still be terrified to use it.
Which brings us to the cultural psychology. The bedrock of the Nordic office is trust-based management. You are judged entirely on your objective results, not your visible presence in a chair.
Right.
But the true cultural linchpin, the invisible force that makes all of this function, is a concept called Janteloven, or the law of Jante.
Okay, I am fascinated by this. I had never heard of it until we started researching this deep dive. What exactly is the law of Jante?
It is an informal, deeply ingrained social code. It was first explicitly codified by a Danish-Norwegian author named Axel Sandemos in a 1933 novel.
Okay.
The Jante Law consists of 10 rules, but they all essentially boil down to a strict philosophy of egalitarianism. You are not to think you are anything special. You are not to think you are better than us. You are not to think you know more than others.
Wow. You are not to think you are anything special. That is the exact polar opposite of the American ethos of you are a unique star destined for greatness. It sounds almost oppressive.
It can be interpreted that way, and many young Scandinavians do chafe against it. It is the absolute antithesis of hyper-individualism. But look at how this cultural de-incentivization shapes the workplace.
How so?
The Jante Law naturally destroys the habit of visible overwork. Think about the classic American or Japanese office worker who stays late, sends emails at midnight, and loudly sighs in the break room about how busy and important they
Oh
are.
yeah, the performance of exhaustion, the humble brag of burnout. Yeah.
Exactly. In Scandinavia, because of the Jante Law, that performance completely loses its audience.
Ah,
If the culture actively disapproves of individual grandstanding and acting like you are the most crucial, indispensable person in the building, then staying late doesn't make you look dedicated. It makes you look arrogant.
wow.
It makes you look like you think you are more important than everyone else who efficiently finished their work and went home to their families.
That is hilarious. I am just laughing trying to imagine applying Janteloven to a modern LinkedIn feed.
Oh, it wouldn't work.
Right. A platform entirely dedicated to telling everyone how special and uniquely grind-focused you are. A Scandinavian LinkedIn must just be people apologizing for getting a promotion.
Basically.
But I do have to push back here. Is the trade-off for this perfect, harmonious work-life balance the complete suppression of individual ambition? If nobody is allowed to be the star player, does that stifle innovation? Does it kill the drive to invent the next iPhone?
That is the primary critique leveled at the Nordic model by American economists.
Yeah.
Does it flatten excellence? Well, the macroeconomic data suggests it doesn't stifle innovation at all. Sweden and Denmark are highly innovative, wealthy economies, producing massive tech companies like Spotify and global giants like Novo Nordisk.
Right.
But what it does flatten is the display of excellence. It channels ambition into collective success rather than individual stardom. You can do great, innovative work, but the culture demands you don't act like a martyr doing it.
So Scandinavia represents the absolute suppression of performative work. But if we swing the global pendulum to the exact opposite extreme, there is an island nation that historically represents the fatal ultimate extreme of total unquestioning dedication.
We have to talk about Japan and their deeply complicated, structurally rigid, and often tragic relationship with labor.
You mentioned it briefly when we talked about the Japanese interpretation of work-life balance, but the word itself in our sources is chilling. Karoshi.
Karoshi translates to death by overwork. It is a word no modern culture should ever need to invent. The phenomenon includes sudden cardiac events, massive strokes, and severe mental health crises leading to suicide, driven entirely by extreme, unyielding overwork. It was first documented by medical professionals in the late 1970s and became officially legally recognized for workers' compensation in the 1980s.
I need to understand the history here. How does an entire society get to a point where working until your heart physically stops beating is a widespread, recognized phenomenon?
We have to look at the macroeconomic and historical context following World War II. Japan was physically devastated.
Right.
Their post-war economic miracle rebuilding a destroyed nation into the world's second-largest economy in a matter of decades was built on a very specific ironclad social contract. The major corporate conglomerates, known historically as Saibatsu and later Keiretsu, operated as family-like communities.
Right.
They offered the promise of lifetime employment. You would never be fired, and you would be taken care of until you died. But in exchange for that absolute security, they demanded absolute, total devotion.
A complete dissolving of the boundary between the individual and the corporation.
Completely dissolved. Leaving the office before your boss was seen as a massive sign of disrespect to the collective. Leaving unused vacation was a mandatory mark of loyalty.
Wow.
And crucially, it didn't end when you finally left the building. The compulsory after-work drinking culture with colleagues, known as nomikai, meant your social life and your evenings were also owned by the company hierarchy. You were expected to drink with your boss until midnight, and be back at your desk at 8 a.m.
It's all-encompassing. The company becomes the state, the family, and the religion.
And the physical toll was, and continues to be, significant. The culture of overwork became so deadly that by 2019, the Japanese government had to launch a massive legislative initiative called work style reform.
Did it help?
Well, it capped overtime hours and mandated vacation usage. It was an active, formal admission by the state that its workforce was literally working itself into the grave, and their birth rate was plummeting because no one had the time or energy to start a family.
But based on the sociological data we are looking at, there is a massive generational fault line cracking open in Japan right now, isn't there?
A profound one. Enter the Satori generation.
Satori, meaning enlightened.
Yes, enlightened, or sometimes translated as the resigned generation. These are Japanese millennials and Gen Z who came of age during Japan's lost decades, the prolonged economic stagnation that followed the bursting of their asset price bubble in 1991.
Okay, so a totally different economic reality.
Exactly. And they are staging a quiet but incredibly profound rebellion. They are looking at the deal their grandparents made, total devotion for lifetime security, and realizing the security is gone.
Right.
Corporations are hiring part-time, temporary workers to save money. So the youth are actively rejecting the total dedication model. They're refusing to sacrifice their personal lives, their mental health, and their physical existence for a corporate ladder that no longer promises a stable ascent.
I want to play devil's advocate for a second, just to avoid purely villainizing that older generation of Japanese management. Because if you think about the generation that survived the Second World War, their nation was reduced to rubble.
Absolutely.
For them, this extreme family-like dedication wasn't just corporate greed. It was literally a matter of national survival. They had to rebuild a country from ash. It was a noble collective survival tactic that worked brilliantly for 30 years.
That is a very fair and necessary historical assessment. The context was entirely existential. Their work ethic literally built the modern world.
But the friction now is that the younger generation is being asked to apply a post-war survival tactic to a peacetime 21st century corporate spreadsheet. And the Satori generation is looking around saying, the war is over, we have the technology, we don't need to die for this tech company's quarterly earnings.
Precisely. The context changed, but the culture refused to adapt. And this generational friction isn't isolated to Japan. It is happening in every developed economy around the world, as younger workers question the fundamental assumptions of their parents' work ethic. Which brings us, inevitably, to the country with perhaps the most philosophically confused, contradictory relationship with work on the entire planet.
The United States of America.
The American paradox. To understand why Americans work the way they do, and why they harbor so much guilt around resting, we have to look back to 1905, to the foundational work of sociologist Max Weber.
You're talking about the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism.
Exactly. Weber argued that modern capitalism's specific obsessive relationship with work doesn't just come from greed. It has its roots deep in Calvinist Puritan theology.
Theology, really?
Yes. The Puritans who settled North America brought with them a profound theological belief in predestination, the idea that God had already chosen who was saved.
Right.
But since you couldn't know if you were saved, you had to look for earthly signs of divine favor.
And diligent labor became that sign.
Yes. Unceasing, diligent labor became morally virtuous. Economic productivity was viewed as literal evidence of God's grace. And crucially, idleness, resting, relaxing, not being productive, was not just seen as lazy. It was viewed as a literal sin. It was a sign of moral failing.
So even though modern American corporate culture is largely secular-like, your HR department isn't preaching Calvinism. That historical ghost is still completely embedded in the machine.
The theology faded away, but the cultural inheritance remained perfectly intact. The American framework still deeply, almost subconsciously, equates hard work with moral worth.
Wow.
A busy person is inherently a good person. A person resting must justify their rest, and this religious undertone merges perfectly with the mythology of the American dream, the cultural promise that if you work hard enough, you will invariably succeed.
But what happens when that dream stalls out? We have seen decades of stagnant wages relative to inflation. We are seeing a massive housing crisis, crippling student debt, and limited upward mobility for younger generations. The basic formula of hard work equals guaranteed success is mathematically breaking down for millions of people.
And that is where the paradox becomes psychologically damaging. Because the cultural programming is so deep, When the dream stalls, the culture doesn't update to say, the macroeconomic system is flawed, let's restructure.
What does it do?
The programming just demands more work. It turns the blame entirely inward. The worker thinks, if I am not succeeding, I must not be grinding hard enough.
Which leads us directly to the most cynical, fascinating symptom of all of this in the modern era, the massive corporate wellness industry.
Oh, it is a troubling phenomenon. We have seen a multi-billion-dollar explosion of meditation apps, corporate yoga retreats, mandatory mindfulness seminars, and resilience training provided by employers.
It is a symptom being aggressively sold as a cure.
Exactly. The problem with the corporate wellness industry is that it shifts the burden of structural failure entirely onto individual self-care.
Right.
Think about the sheer hypocrisy of the system we just described. A company runs a lean staff, expects 60-hour weeks, and offers unlimited vacation that employees are too terrified to take. The employee inevitably develops intense anxiety and burnout.
And the company's solution isn't to hire more staff, fix the workload, or mandate time off. Their solution is to give the employee a free subscription to a meditation app.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? I'll tell you exactly what it feels like. Corporate wellness programs feel like putting a tiny cartoon Band-Aid on a shattered leg, while the person who broke your leg with a baseball bat is standing right there, handing you the Band-Aid and telling you to just deep breathe and practice mindfulness through the pain.
That is exactly what it is. It is the ultimate performance of balance. It allows the institution to look like it deeply cares about employee well-being without having to alter the profitable mechanisms of overwork at all.
And then the pandemic hit. And suddenly, this entire delicate, toxic system was thrown into a massive global
The
experiment.
COVID-19 pandemic forced the largest mass experiment in labor history. Almost overnight, the physical, spatial boundaries of work were completely erased, and the sociological results were incredibly split.
For some people, it was an absolute revelation.
Yes, if you remove the commute, which in the U.S. averages about 54 minutes a day round trip, you gave people an hour of their lives back. Without the performative requirements of sitting in an open-plan office looking busy for the boss, many workers found incredible efficiency. They did their work, shut the laptop, and achieved real balance.
But for millions of others, it was an absolute nightmare. Because when the laptop is sitting on your kitchen table, the physical boundary, the liminal space of the commute is gone. Work just bleeds into everything.
The data showed that initially, the remote workday actually expanded by 2 to 3 hours. People were answering emails from bed.
Ugh.
Without the physical act of leaving a building, they didn't know how to trigger their own firebend. They didn't know how to stop. And this exhaustion led to the Great Resignation.
Right, workers demanding unprecedented flexibility.
But what we've seen as the dust settles is that hybrid working a few days at home, a few days in the office, without the cultural permission to actually disconnect, doesn't create balance at all.
No.
No, it just births a new monster. Hybrid overwork. You are now expected to be visibly on in the office and digitally on at home.
So if unlimited vacation is a trap, wellness apps are a Band-Aid, and hybrid schedules just shift the physical location of the burnout. How do we actually move forward?
Well, to move beyond the performative surface, we have to stop looking at this as a time management problem you can solve with a calendar color coding system. We have to start looking at it as a profound philosophical problem. We must ask the ultimate question: what is work actually for?
And based on everything we've looked at today, across all these different cultures and histories, there seem to be 4 fundamental philosophies, 4 entirely different answers to that question.
Let's break them down carefully, because diagnosing where you fit is crucial. The first philosophy is work as contribution.
This is the idea that work is how you sustain your community.
Yes. Historically, this traces back to agricultural communities or medieval guilds. You work to keep the village functioning, to keep people fed and sheltered.
Okay.
In the modern context, this philosophy is highly skeptical of work that just fills time or makes a corporate profit without offering any tangible social benefit. People operating under this framework don't care about climbing the ladder. They care about their impact. And when their part is done, they stop.
Yeah, then there's the second philosophy, work as identity. This is the classic American and Japanese corporate model.
Yes, the answer to the question, who are you,
Hmm.
is your job title. Your career trajectory is your biography. And in this framework, overwork isn't seen as a sacrifice or a burden. It is an act of deep self-expression. You are manifesting your potential in the world through your labor.
The third philosophy is work as necessity. The Northern European, the Figueroa model.
Work is strictly a means to an end. It is not who you are. It is what you do to fund the life you actually want to live. It is transactional. Work ends, the vault door shuts, and real-life family, hobbies, community begins.
And finally, the fourth philosophy, work as meaning, the Ikigai model.
Integration over balance. Your work is perfectly aligned with your passion, your skills, and the world's needs. The distinction between work and life dissolves, not because you are a trapped corporate drone, but because you find deep, personal, sustaining meaning in what you do every day.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are really talking about isn't work-life balance at all. That phrase is too small for what is actually happening.
No, it is entirely inadequate. Work-life balance implies a schedule hack. But what we are really having is a fundamental values conversation about what a good human life looks like.
Let's look at three valid versions of the good life we've explored today. First, you have the French worker operating under the necessity framework.
Right.
They work their 35 hours a week, they take their mandatory 5 weeks of vacation, they value the evening meal as a sacred, protected social institution. Their good life is funded by work, but it consists entirely of food, family, and rest.
Then you have the American tech entrepreneur operating under the identity framework. They are working 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
They're totally engaged, fueled by global ambition, trying to build something massive that changes the world. Their good life is intensity, capability, and the pursuit of significance.
And then you have the Danish worker, leaving at 4:00 p.m. on the dot, embracing Hinger with their neighbors, genuinely not checking an email or thinking about a spreadsheet until the next morning. Their good life is local, warm, unhurried, and deeply comfortable.
And here is the absolute crucial point for anyone listening. None of these lives are objectively wrong, and none of them are objectively right, but they are deeply, fundamentally distinct from one another.
Yeah.
You cannot have all three at the same time. The misery comes from trying to live one philosophy while your culture or your company demands another.
I want to challenge you, the listener, right now. Think about the last time you were at a party, meeting new people. How quickly did you bring up what you do for a living within the first minute, the first 5 minutes?
Probably the first minute.
Right. If I magically stripped your job title away from you right now, if you could never use it again to introduce yourself, how much of your identity would actually be left?
It is a confronting question. This raises an important point you have to ask yourself. You have to diagnose which of the four frameworks, contribution, identity, necessity, or meaning, you are currently operating under.
Yeah.
And then you have to take the much harder step, deciding which one you actually want to be living under for the next decade of your life.
Because if your actions don't match your true philosophy, you will always feel out of balance no matter how many hours you work or how many meditation apps you download.
Precisely.
Well, we've covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by looking at a phrase that we all casually throw around, work-life balance, and uncovered how it's actually an illusion born in the dual-income households of the 1970s.
We did.
We traveled linguistically from the tragic reality of karoshi in post-war Japan to the warm, structurally protected evenings of Hij in Denmark.
We examined the paradox of the 50-hour productivity cliff, realizing that human brains are not engines, and that more hours often mathematically guarantee worse results.
We stared down the uniquely American anxiety of 9.5 unused vacation days, fueled by Calvinist guilt and lack of structural safety nets. And we looked at how Scandinavian societies used the Jante law and daddy quotas to culturally squash performative burnout.
It's all connected.
Ultimately, we realized that the words we use to describe our labor literally dictate the boundaries of our actual existence.
And before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought that builds on everything we've unpacked today. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about how we define our prime adult decades through our relationship to work. But if work is currently your primary identity, what does that mean for how we define retirement?
Oh, wow. That is a whole other cliff.
It is. If your entire answer to the question, who are you, is your job title, does retiring mean you lose your identity entirely? Do you become a non-person in your own mind?
God, I hope not.
Or does retirement finally give you the permission to choose an entirely new framework for your life, to finally move from identity to contribution or from necessity to meaning?
That is a profound question to chew on. If the seesaw completely disappears, who are you?
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope this conversation prompts you to take a hard, honest look at your own calendar, your own vocabulary, and ask yourself the real question. Are you balancing, integrating, or just surviving?
A great question.
Until next time, step off the tightrope, and we'll see you in the deep end.